All signs are pointing to the Milwaukee Bucks trading Giannis Antetokounmpo either over the next few weeks or during the next offseason. But to this point, in a potential Giannis trade, there have been no clear indications that teams would be willing to pay Milwaukee something as massive as what the Clippers paid for Paul George or what the Phoenix Suns gave up for Kevin Durant. Well, looking at the situation, the San Antonio Spurs, if they wanted to, could really pair Giannis with Victor Wembanyama to create perhaps the greatest big man tandem in NBA history. But at the same time, it's also hard to comprehend the thought of San Antonio giving up either Stephon Castle or Dylan Harper in a potential deal. Also, there have been reports indicating that even the Atlanta Hawks wouldn't be willing to include the 2026 first-round pick they acquired from the Pelicans during the last draft in any potential trade for Giannis. It is somewhat a startling turn of events that we're witnessing. This is a certified superstar in Giannis that we're talking about, a two-time MVP in his prime, a perennial All-NBA defender who at the moment would be the fourth best player in the NBA at worst. Under normal circumstances, the trade market for this caliber of player would be vast and teams would be lining up for a chance to land him, and yet right now, most of the fan bases of those teams that might like to trade for him are suddenly preaching caution. Well, ultimately, there are two massive league-wide trends that are amplifying teams' hesitation to go all in for Giannis. First, there's obviously the new CBA, which makes building trade packages trickier than ever, to the point that simply designing a qualified trade would be difficult nowadays. Also, the penalties imposed by the new CBA against overspending second-apron teams have also raised the risks of acquiring a supermax player like Giannis. But then, the second and probably an even bigger factor that influences a Giannis trade is the emergence of the OKC Thunder, a team who by currently laying waste to the entire NBA has fundamentally broken the trade market for expensive superstars. But how exactly are the OKC Thunder doing this? The LA Clippers are clear proof of what happens when a team gives up a talented young player plus a ton of draft assets to acquire a current superstar, then suddenly everything just goes wrong. Obviously, the Spurs don't want to send Dylan Harper to Milwaukee only to watch him develop into another Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, the same way the Atlanta Hawks don't want to give up a first-round pick that could realistically land on top of the draft just to acquire Giannis right now. Basically, recent NBA trade history has strongly favored the team giving away their superstar and not the other way around. OKC is living proof of this, and the Kevin Durant trade to the Phoenix Suns also supports this notion. But looking at it, there was one condition that probably convinced the Clippers to trade for Paul George and the Suns to trade for KD, and it's a condition that doesn't exist right now for potential Giannis trade seekers, and that is the existence of a wide-open NBA. Looking at it, back when the Clippers traded for PG in 2019, one of the reigning NBA finalists, the Golden State Warriors, had just lost Kevin Durant to the Brooklyn Nets, while the other reigning NBA finalists, the Toronto Raptors, were about to lose Kawhi Leonard to the Clippers themselves. Then, in February of 2023, the day the Suns traded for Kevin Durant, the best team in the NBA, the Boston Celtics, were only on pace to win 58 games. So basically, both those Clippers and Suns teams had reasons to convince themselves that a superstar trade could make them championship favorites. But right now, no feasible Giannis trade can do the same for any team because there's nothing anything can do to build a plausible championship favorite over the OKC Thunder. Fresh off winning a championship, OKC has been straight up inevitable. Well, OKC is by no means an automatic champion because there's no such thing, but the point is that the price Milwaukee will extract from the team acquiring Giannis could only be justified by winning a championship, and anyone's odds of beating the Thunder, with or without Giannis, are just really low right now. Well, let's just put it this way. At this same time in December of last season, Boston were the title favorites with plus 200 odds to win the championship, only trailed by OKC who were at plus 500. But right now, the Thunder's title odds are currently at plus 130 with the next best team, the Denver Nuggets, coming in at plus 700. Basically, OKC's status as title favorites is as ironclad as anything the NBA has seen in years, and this is why right now, most teams are asking one question, and that is, when is actually the best time to take on the OKC Thunder? Well, on one hand, it doesn't look like right now is a good time, especially if coming at OKC with your best shot would come at the expense of your future draft capital. But then, on the other hand, this might also be the best shot teams are going to get against the Thunder. We gotta remember that OKC is set to receive the Clippers' first-round pick in the loaded 2026 draft, and they still have a huge haul of future draft assets coming their way the next several years. Also, the Thunder's best players are all in or just about to enter their prime years. The team's cap sheet is also as planned out as you could expect, which is why there's every bit of reason to think that this OKC team will only get better from here. But the question is, how many teams could actually be a Giannis away from competing with the Thunder maybe over the next 2 to 3 years? Well, it's not especially a long list of teams. There's the New York Knicks. Obviously, they just won the NBA Cup, and this season might be their best shot at getting back to the finals. But then, Milwaukee would rather trade with almost anyone else. The Denver Nuggets, on the other hand, have even less to offer in a trade than New York does. And the Lakers aren't far above either in terms of draft capital that they can trade. Well, I think one interesting wildcard in the potential Giannis sweepstakes would be the Cleveland Cavaliers, a team who beat the Thunder once last season. With a young All-NBA talent in Evan Mobley in place, the Cavs have such a high floor for the next 5 years or more. But if they suspect that their window to win it all is here and now, especially with Donovan Mitchell in his prime, maybe they could think of swapping Evan Mobley with Giannis or building a package centered around Jarrett Allen in the deal. This is possible if the Cavs believe in dominating the Eastern Conference by putting all their chips into the present instead of banking on a future wherein the Eastern Conference gets better as Donovan Mitchell ages. But then the problem is, the Cavs are still currently $22 million above the second apron, and they would most likely have to get below it for a Giannis trade to be plausible, and that likely entails gutting the team's depth, which is one of the things that made the Cavs special last season. Outside of those obvious contenders, there are a couple of young emerging rosters that would surely have long-term ambitions against OKC, such as the Spurs, the Rockets, the Pistons, and maybe even the Atlanta Hawks. But should either of those teams really try to land Giannis now? Well, take Houston for example. Say they build a trade package around Alperen Şengün, Fred VanVleet, and a massive amount of draft picks. By building around a 31-year-old Giannis and a 37-year-old Kevin Durant, the Rockets would be declaring their belief that their best shot to take down OKC could come very soon. And to be fair, trading Şengün for Giannis now won't necessarily mean the Rockets would collapse if things go wrong, as they'd still have Amen Thompson, Jabari Smith, and Reed Shepherd in the near future. But the problem, I think, is that having those players on market rate contracts without spare draft capital probably still won't be able to stand up to OKC in a few years. And that is because the Thunder didn't have to give away a bunch of long-term assets for them to get this good. They just did so organically, and the Rockets can do that too if they preserve their assets for a moment at which OKC appears a little bit more beatable in the future. Basically, if Houston goes all in now, they can't go all in later at a time wherein maybe OKC's depth could appear more compromised because of second apron restrictions. The San Antonio Spurs are also facing the same dilemma. Do they really risk it all for Giannis right now when they already have Victor Wembanyama, De'Aaron Fox, and 2 other potential stars who are still on rookie contracts? To be honest, San Antonio might never really have to make another big move, as they could just wait for the Thunder to potentially cap out in the future. Well, the second apron will come for both OKC and San Antonio, but it's definitely gonna affect OKC first because of the massive contracts they've already committed to their big three. Then there's the Detroit Pistons and the Atlanta Hawks, who are both new to this level of contention, but most notably, both teams already excel in the areas of the game wherein Giannis would figure to contribute the most. Detroit outscores opponents by a massive 13 points in the paint per game, while Atlanta scores the 4th most fast break points in the entire league this season. Detroit has been among the NBA's best defenses for more than a year now, while Atlanta is ranked in the top 10 of the NBA defensively for the first time since drafting Trae Young. So would either team really need to take a swing at Giannis now, even if Cade Cunningham hasn't won a playoff series yet, and even if the Hawks have just started establishing themselves without Trae Young? Well, obviously, these young teams all have motivations to chase Giannis. If the Spurs are worried about Wembanyama's long-term health given the track record for players his size, maybe they would want to strike early at a championship. Atlanta and Detroit also play in a weaker Eastern Conference, so maybe they could realize that they could score relatively easy paths to the championship round while hoping that tough battles in the Western Conference could somehow weaken the Thunder on their way to the NBA Finals. But again, there is a push and pull to all of this, and that is cost versus actual reward. Do all these teams really need to make such a massive deal when there's a juggernaut like OKC waiting in the playoffs? Why not simply wait and see if something weakens the Thunder in a few years? At least you gotta keep your assets, because your draft capital is not going anywhere until you purposely give them to Milwaukee. But then, outside of the trade market for Giannis, the Thunder also represents a broader shift around the league. There used to be 3 main ways to build an NBA team. One is through the draft, another is by way of trades, and another is via free agency. However, the current CBA has just disrupted this idea. Again, as it made trades harder, the trade market has essentially weakened. The second apron has also made acquiring star talent in free agency riskier than ever, which is why right now, future draft picks and young cheap talent is seen to hold the best value in terms of roster building. Well, look no further. Both the Milwaukee Bucks and the OKC Thunder were built around MVP talent, but then the similarities end there. Giannis is the only player on the Bucks' current roster who was drafted by the team, and Milwaukee has instead leaned on trades and free agency to build around him. And that same thing is a huge reason why they failed to build depth around him at this stage of his prime. By contrast, the Thunder's ability to surround SGA with elite young players like J-Dub and Chet Holmgren has been possible because of Sam Presti's endless supply of draft capital. Sure, the Thunder landed Hartenstein in free agency and they acquired Caruso via trade, but the team's commitment to drafting talent is still the main centerpiece of their success. The point here is that teams using the draft to build homegrown talent are going to be in a much better shape and have longer runways compared to teams that are solely relying on making massive moves via trades and free agency. And in a copycat league like the NBA, teams are now trying to stack draft capital while trying to follow the Thunder's blueprint, which again brings us to another important question. If the LA Clippers, who traded for Paul George, and the Suns, who traded for Kevin Durant, who fought on level playing fields, still didn't win a championship, what are the odds that any team who trades for Giannis can succeed in today's NBA, which is totally dominated by the Thunder? This is the reality that the Milwaukee Bucks would have to deal with in terms of them trying to gain maximum value in a potential Giannis trade, and this is something that they need to accept. That is, unless one of those teams suddenly decides that the OKC Thunder are actually beatable right now. But which team should actually go all in for Giannis right now? Feel free to drop your thoughts in the comment section below, and again, if you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing as well. Again, this has been Real Balls, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.